welcome to my tutoring summative report for EDU 345. My name is Haley Dobbins, and I'm going to be sharing with you today my experience of tutoring for the Success for All Direct Instruction program. I want to first start by introducing you to my student. My student was a 7-year-old first grader named Damani. He's African American. He lives with his mom and sister. I'm unsure if his father's in the picture. He never mentioned his father, but he often mentioned his mom and sister. His sister is a student at the elementary school that he attends, and whenever we would go upstairs, he would get so excited and tell me all about her. So this made me believe that he has a good relationship with his sister. Damani loves watching TV and videos on his phone. He's very proud that he's in first grade and has a phone, and often would complain that he wasn't allowed to use it at school and that it had to stay on his teacher, Miss Beatty's desk. Damani loves action figures, especially Iron Man and the Predator. Before tutoring Damani, I had no idea who the Predator was, but now I do, because Damani talked about him every session. He really loved the Predator and other superheroes and characters from TV shows and movies. Damani dislikes reading and school in general. Mrs. Beatty, his teacher, explained to me that he is failing reading. She thinks this may be due to the fact that he is often late to school and misses his reading instruction. Tutoring Damani at first was quite the challenge. It was really hard to get him motivated to do any work. He was falling asleep during our sessions, and he just didn't want to answer anything I was asking him. At first, I was reinforcing him with stickers and pencils and erasers and different things like that. But it wasn't working, so I had to think outside of the box. I knew that Damani loved action figures, so I went to the local Dollar Tree and picked up a few action figures and other little toys. This worked wonders. It seemed like Damani was a whole new student. As soon as he had his eye on the prize, he was willing to work, and he was actually learning a lot. He could earn 1 action figure per week, and the other day of the week that I was tutoring him, he could earn something smaller. He was also positively reinforced during our sessions with Skittles or other types of candy. When he would do something good or get an answer correct, I would give him a few Skittles to keep him motivating throughout our sessions. This also worked really well. No longer was he falling asleep. He was now awake and alert and ready to learn. We decided that during his final session, he would receive the final prize of an Iron Man action figure. I brought this with me every session, and he would often ask to see it. And he was so excited to get this action figure. He would always talk about it. Every day I'd go and pick him up from the lunch, and he'd be like, "So when do I get my Iron Man action figure? Did you bring it with me?" And it was really cute to see him get exciting about it. But he knew that he had to learn his material and earn during our sessions. After each session, we went over if he was behaving or if he was following my directions, and if he was, then he earned. During our first session together, Damani completed a pre-assessment. The first section of the pre-assessment covers phonemic awareness. The first part identifies initial sounds in a spoken word. Damani did wonderful with this. He got a 10 out of 10 the first time and mastered this. So for example, if I said the word dive, he would have to say duh, because that is the first sound. The second part was blending sounds together. He did not do as strongly in this section. He got a 6 out of 10. I'm unsure if his struggle was that he couldn't hear me or if the masks were interfering, but for this section, I would give him the sound, so e, and he would have to say me. The third section, Damani also mastered on his first assessment, and this is breaking down a word and saying each sound separately. So for example, I would say the word red, and he would have to say d. Overall, Damani did really well with the phonemic awareness section of the assessment. Next was concepts about print. Damani mastered all his concepts about print on the first session. We now went into reading letter sounds. For LS1, he had to read the letter sounds by looking at them typed out on a piece of paper. So for example, he would point to the letter M and say Damani did fairly well with this section and knew the majority of the basic alphabet sounds. He missed G, X, NG, and TH. Next, Damani was assessed on his ability to write specific letters. So I would give the sound and he would have to write the letter. So for example, I would say and he would have to write M. The next section was identifying letter names. So for this part, he had to point at the written letters on the assessment sheet and say the name. He struggled with this and writing his specific letter sounds. He did better with writing, but he did not know many of the names. So for LS2, he got 17 out of 31 correct, and for LS3, he got 11 out of 26 correct. So this is something that I knew that we were going to have to focus on a lot during our tutoring sessions because it's such a foundational aspect of being able to read is knowing your letters and being able to write. This was where the pre-assessment ended and we moved into tutoring plan number 1. Here's a screenshot of my tutoring plan. I'm going to break this down and explain the different sections during the next slide. So the activities that we used during our first 4 sessions were the first one was PA2 to blend sounds presented orally together. So I picked this because this is where he was struggling on the pre-assessment, that PA2 where he only got 6 out of 10 correct. This activity was not very successful. We only ended up doing it twice during our 4 sessions. We did it during our first 2 sessions. The third session we ran out of time, and during our final session, I chose to use these 4 minutes to do a little bit more ABC practice and letter skill practice with Damani, since he did not know his ABCs. Damani was struggling to repeat back to me all the phonemes in each word. I wonder if he was not able to hear me correctly because of the mask. I'm unsure how accurate my data is for this section because on the second day, Damani was falling asleep our whole session and had a complete lack of focus and was unwilling to work for me. The next activity also covered phonemic awareness too, and this was an activity called using Say It Fast. During this activity, I would give sounds to Damani and he would put them together to form the word. He did much better with this activity, and when I broke down the words into individual phonemes, he was able to say the words correctly most of the time. The third section focused on phonemic awareness 3, breaking down each sound into a word presented orally. We used an activity called Playing Break It Down. During this activity, we stretched up the sounds that you hear in words, and as you would say each sound, you would point to a box. It showed that there was a one-to-one correspondence between the sound and the box. At first, Damani really struggled with this activity, but once he got comfortable with it, he did very well during our last 2 sessions. Again, I'm not sure that our data from the second session was accurate because he was falling asleep. When I first assessed Damani in this section, he had got a 9 out of 10, so he was pretty comfortable in this area. The final activity was identifying letter names. This was a 7-minute long activity, and this was something that we spent a lot of time working on because I thought it was really important, and this was one of the big goals that I had for Damani. During the pre-assessment session, I noticed that he knew most of his letter sounds, but did not know how to write almost half of the alphabet or what their names were. He could not even say his whole alphabet. By the end of our 4 sessions, he has finally learned how to say the whole alphabet and learned how to write 8 more letters based on their sounds and how to identify 7 more letters by their names. After completing 4 sessions with these activities, I did my first reassessment. During the first reassessment, Damani mastered PA2. He now had a 9 out of 10 in this category. He got 3 of the remaining 4 correct. He got me, not, and main. He was really close to getting the word stop correctly, but he was mishearing me and kept saying the word shop, so he was hearing an H instead of a T. The next section was concepts about print, which he had already mastered. We then went into letter skills 1, which is reading letter sounds. Damani mastered G and X, and AE, like in cake, so A, and OE, like in phone, O. Since Damani got all of set 1 correct, he was able to move on to tutoring plan 2. So after the next slide, I will go into tutoring plan 2 in the assessment for that. The next section was writing letters for specific sounds. During this reassessment, Damani mastered writing 8 more of his letters based off their sound. He now only had the letters C, K, CK, W, B, and X to learn. Damani learned 7 more letter names during our first 4 sessions, and so now he knew 18 out of 26. He still had the letters G, C, U, H, W, V, Y, and Q to learn. So now we are going to go into the second part of the tutoring assessment. The first section of the second part is recalls essential sight words. Damani got 7 out of 12 in set 1. He knew A, I, is, like, was, the, and see. Sight words is something that I discovered that Damani struggles with. The next part is reading words using blending. For this section, Damani only got 1 word correct. The assessment has us remind the students that they can sound out each sound separately and blend them together if they need to. So if they don't recognize that the word is tin, they could go tin. The third part of the assessment was spells words by breaking them into separate sounds. He got 2 out of 3 in the first set correct. He got the word sip and top correct. For this section, I would say the word and then use it in a sentence. Then I'd ask him to repeat the word and say the different sounds that he heard within the word. Then he was asked to write the word on a piece of paper. This ended the first reassessment, and we went into tutoring plan 2. This tutoring plan looks a little bit different, and we're going to review the activities that I did with Damani during these sessions. So during the next sessions 5 to 8, the activities were the following. The first activity worked on PA2, blending sounds presented orally together. The game was called Playing Building Words. I would give Damani the sounds, and he would put them together to build the word. Damani did very good with this activity. This activity required him to move his hands inward as he sounded out each phoneme in the word, and then when he put all the sounds together to make the word, he would clap. I saw Damani come such a long way with this activity in blending sounds together to create words. The next activity was on word skills, and it was reads words using blending. We used the activity blend sounds into words. This activity worked on blending sounds together, and it focused on how different sounds come together to make a word. I would write down a word on a piece of paper spread apart, then under it a little closer together, again a little closer together. So for example, if the word was man, he would start by saying and and then as it got closer, he would say it faster. And man. At the beginning of session 5, Damani was struggling with this, but as the week went on, he became stronger in this activity. I think that it was because I chose words with blends, and he was not good at recognizing the blends in words and breaking them apart. Once I started picking simpler words, he did very well with this activity. The next activity covered word skills 2, and it was called counting sounds, and he just had to count the different sounds in the word. He did very well with this activity. Next, we did identifying letter names again. And lastly, recalling essential sight words by having him read the read words in a shared storybook. Damani struggled with this activity. It is now a time to reassess Damani for the second time. As we mentioned before, Damani has mastered all of phonemic awareness. He's mastered concepts about print. For letter sounds, he learned. He got 11 of the sounds correct. For writing the letters of specific sounds, he got 3 more letters and now only needs to learn 3 more. For identifying letter names, he mastered this, and I was so proud of him. He knew all the letter names of the alphabet. Moving on to sight words, he got 3 more sight words, so this was still an area where Damani was struggling. He did so much better with reading using blending this time. He got all the way to set 3. He also did better with spelling a word by breaking it into its separate sounds. He almost got through set 2, but he wrote LOC for lock instead of LOCK. For our final week, we did tutoring plan 2 again, and the activities were very similar. Instead of doing identifying letter names, we moved on to identifying letter sounds, using the letter blending cards to match the letter sounds, working on the vowel combination sounds. Damani did really well with this activity. For sight words, we switched up the activity. Damani still struggled. Moving on to the summative assessment results, he excelled in phonemic awareness and mastered all 3 sections. He mastered concepts of print and excelled in this. He excelled and is still developing in his letter skills. He knows all the letter sounds of the alphabet and most of vowel combination sounds. He mastered all his letter names during the second reassessment, and he knows how to write 28 out of 31 of his letters based off their sound. He excelled in word skills, and by the end was getting good at reading words using blending and improving on spelling words by separating them into their sounds. For sight words, he did not excel and is still really struggling with sight word recognition. For strategies, Damani really liked the playing building words, identifying letter names, and letter blending card match. These are activities that I explained earlier. Another strategy we used during one of our sessions was guided imagery, and this allows a student to explore concepts by creating mental images. So we used the book The Color Monster, and he listened to the story and had to write based off what he heard. So he drew the different emotion monsters, and in the book, if you're not familiar with it, so for happy, it'll explain that happy is yellow and the sun is shining and they're smiling. So he had to focus on how to draw the character's face. He drew what he heard in the story. He drew that he was yellow. He drew that it was sunny, and continued on this with the rest of the characters and emotions. Moving on to the science of reading. The concepts that were most specific to my tutoring were from the word recognition section. Since Damani could not identify many of his letters and some of his sounds, we worked a lot on his phonological awareness by segmenting and blending words' phonemes and decoding, focusing on the alphabetic principle. Now that Damani has mastered most of his sounds and all of his letter names, his next step would be sight recognition and being able to recall his sight words and vocabulary under the language comprehension section. I picked these 2 sections because they will help him to become a more fluent reader. After working with Damani, I'm unsure if his reading challenges are developmental, but I think that it may be possible due to his many inconsistencies. This may also be due to his lack of attendance. At this time, I do not think that Damani will be reading at grade level, even with explicit instruction and one-on-one assistance. I think that in the future he may be capable if he starts showing up to school, but right now he's very far behind and he's too inconsistent in his responses to be able to say for sure that he will read at grade level. Throughout this class, my 2 favorite articles were with the St. John Bosco and trauma. The preventative versus the repressive approach is what stood out to me. The repressive approach is defined as rules that are set in place and monitored from afar. Administration only steps in if these rules are broken. The preventative method is defined as rules that are set in place and the administration stays close by ensuring that these rules are followed, preventing them from being broken. This preventative method was inspired through love, gentleness, patience, and charity. I really enjoyed this approach because the administration and the teachers are not just sitting back and watching and waiting for their students to fail. They are right there to help their students and to be positive role models for them. The trauma article stood out to me because trauma can be caused by so many different things, and it's not necessarily a result from a violent event. This article explained that trauma can often be misdiagnosed with behavior, anxiety, or attention disorders. I think this is something to be aware of as a future educator. In a future job interview, I could talk about my experience with the direct instruction scripted program. also with my experience for planning lessons to meet the needs of individual students. Thank you so much for watching. This presentation was created using Slides to Go. Please let me know if you have any questions.